Good evening. Welcome to Spring-Ford Area School District's board meeting for Monday, November 28th, 2022 at 7:30 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Spring-Ford Board of School Directors believes the community has the right to bring before the board issues and concerns they may have about items on the agenda or about items in general which affect the district or their children. Because of this belief and philosophy, the board will schedule a time at the beginning and conclusion of every meeting to have an opportunity for community members to share their concerns with the board. At the start of the meeting, members from the public may comment on agenda items only. The school board will move through the meeting agenda, then at the end, when prompted, there will be a time for public comment. This meeting is being filmed to be broadcast on community cable channels and online. Individuals attending to make public comment should be aware that they are being videotaped. Speakers will be asked to state their name and the area in which you reside before your comment.
All right, so good evening and welcome. Mrs. Bickert, would you please let us know what board members are in attendance this evening?
Yes, this evening we have Mrs. Deerdorf, Mrs. Earl, Mrs. Hermans, Dr. Motzer, Mrs. Weingarten, Dr. Wright, and Mrs. Zazowski. Mr. Jackson and Mr. Schaefer are both absent.
Thank you very much. A couple of announcements. On Saturday, November 12th, the board met for professional development purposes with Tina Valletto from the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. All right. Any other announcements for us? All right. Then we would have public to be heard on agenda items only. If there is anyone here who would like to speak on agenda items only, please approach the podium and give your name and where you live. Seeing that no one is approaching the podium, we'll move on. Then we have presentations this evening. Our first presentation is from Mr. Daniel Miscavige, our athletic director, to commend the fall athletic students. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having us this evening. Our first team that we would like to recognize is our boys cross-country team, coached by Mr. Larry Recton. The 2022 boys cross-country team had an excellent season. They were undefeated in every pack dual meet, amassing a 5-0 season record en route to winning the Liberty Division title. They went on to win the pack championship meet with a low score of 52 points. This is the fourth team title won by the boys in their last 7 seasons. 6 runners made all-league by virtue of placing in the top 21 runners at the championship meet. The boys also took home the third-place trophy at the William Tennant Invitational. Members of the cross-country team in attendance: Mason Short, Max LaBarbera, Jed King, Sean Krasnick, Shahan Amen, Evan Badger, Jacob Delgado, Eli Dunham, Ethan Tharp, Quinn Smith, Gus Smith, Nick Bannon, and Jack Stanek. Okay. Next, we have members of our girls golf team. The girls were 14-1 in their dual matches this season. They were 10-0 in Pioneer Athletic Conference play. It's the third PAC championship in 4 years, and the school best second-place finish in the District 1 team tournament. Members of the girls golf team in attendance this evening, coached by Mr. John Brennan, Nicole Yoon, Morgan Kunze, Sierra Griffith, Audrey Cummings, Megan McPoyle, Allie Adams, Susan Hijazi, Rashiki Kokji, and Isabella Cagliola. Next, we have our boys golf team. The boys golf team had a season record of 16-1. 7 players moved on to districts as well as the team. They finished in second place in District 1. The top 3 finishers in the Pac-10 tournament. The Pac-10 championship match against Pope John Paul, Springford won by a score of 182 to 207. Coaches Jerry Hollingsworth, Dan Butterwick, Jason Marcellus, and Greg O'Connor. The boys in attendance this evening: Jaden Minter, Luke Fazio, Jake Blackmore, Josh Miano, Charlie Farisi, Sean Drover, and Lucas Kozak. Hold on, stay put, guys. We also have a PAC individual champion in Jaden Minter. Jaden shot a 73 to become the PAC individual champion. And our last championship team is our girls tennis team, coached by Mr. Todd Reagan, Devin Stano. And the girls in attendance this evening, we have Bryn Frankhauser, Katie Kraus, Alexis Liu, Mia Matrosino, Brooke McPike, Evelyn Mahia, and Casey Roan. The girls' tennis team won the league championship with an 11-0 record. They finished 18-3 overall and advanced to the district semifinals and the PIAA state semifinals. This is the 4th consecutive PAC championship for the girls' tennis team and their 3rd straight appearance in the state semifinals. Put. We also have our Mia Matrosino won the girls PAC singles championship for the 3rd straight year with a victory over Allison Root in the final. Mia then advanced through districts and states and finished the season with a District 1 and PIAA 3rd place medal. Congratulations, Mia, and the girls tennis team. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you in the winter time for more championships.
Thank you very much. It is always such a pleasure to see the athletes come here, and we really appreciate it. It makes the highlight of our evening. Thank you. All right. We have another presentation this evening. Mrs. Katie Gardy, our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Educational Technology, has a data presentation just as exciting as our athletic presentation, I know.
How do I follow that? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for letting me present today. I'll give the students just a second to leave.
Mrs. Garvey says that because, like most of our audience, just left with
I know, I thought it
parents.
was maybe me, but they're the parents. Okay, so good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about our 21-22 school year PSSA assessment and Keystone exam results. So tonight you're going to see a district summary of the ELA, which is English Language Arts by grade, mathematics by grade, science by grade, and some additional reporting will be the cohort data. The Future Ready Index actually just became populated sometime today, so you'll be able to go to that public-facing site, and we're going to talk a little bit about the action plans that we have from our comprehensive plan. And just as a quick reminder, our assessments for English Language Arts are administered in grades 3 through 8. Math is also administered in grades 3 through 8. Science is administered in grades 4 and 8. And we'll also talk about our Keystone data, and I'll show you that in a couple slides ahead. So the PSSA assessments, I kind of mentioned this already, but again, looking at what grade levels and what subject areas are administered, and then the Keystones or exams or end-of-course assessments, really designed to assess proficiency in the subject areas of literature, algebra 1, and biology. So the first section we're going to take a look at is the information from third grade, ELA, and math trends. So there are two sets of data you'll look at tonight. When they look at the third grade trends, that means grade level of third grade year over different years. So 2018, one group of students, 2019, one group of students, 2021, obviously we did not have the assessments in 2020, and then 2022. So these are different students over the different years. I won't do the full read aloud for you here, but just taking notice, thinking about the students that we have assessed here in 2022, these were students that missed a part of their first grade year, and then that second grade year was a mix of students with in-person instructions, obviously in the beginning of the year, all virtual instruction. So taking a look at where we were in that 2019, 2020 year, 21 year even, compared to that 2022, there are some discrepancies looking at some of this data based on overall trends. Same thing of fourth grade, and I know we talked about this once before. I do have these based on the bar graphs, and then in a slide or two, you'll be able to see the numbers, because I know just depending on how you like to look at data, it might be more helpful to look at the actual numbers. Taking a look at, though, at the fourth grade, this is the ELA math trends as well as their science on here. So taking a look here, you can see again, we have the 2018, 2019, 2021, and 2022 data. This looks a little more consistent overall, looking at what our fourth graders have done year over year. So this next slide, I'll give you a little more time to take a look at it. This information has the information for advanced and proficient scores in 2019, 2021, 2022, and then the comparison of the state average of advanced and proficient for 2022. The last column is the difference from the Springford scores to the state comparison. And just about maybe 2.5 hours ago, the site had been updated with some comparison data to look at different schools across the state, and I'll share that with you in just a little bit. I think it's really important to note where our students continue to outrank many of the state comparisons. We don't just put all of the information in this one bucket of PSSA results, but it is a nice comparison to understand where our students continue to achieve in the areas of math, ELA, and in this case, fourth grade with science. One of the things some of the community members asked last spring when I gave the 21 presentation was really that breakdown of not just looking at proficient and advanced, but really looking at where those 4 categories fall. So I did this on the slide looking at, again, the ELA for grades 3 and 4, math 3 and 4, and then grade science for fourth grade. And each of the categories below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. The state has set a measure that we expect all students to be proficient or advanced. That's the end goal. Obviously, any students that aren't hitting those benchmarks, we're looking at other additional data. How do we support those students to continue to make growth, whether towards their IEP goals, whether towards the other state standard benchmarks, but we're making sure that we're moving all students towards proficiency.
Ms. Gardy?
Yes.
I don't know if it's okay to ask questions now, or do you want
Sure,
me to hold them
you
to
can
the
go
end?
ahead if it helps.
Going back to that slide, I don't recall that slide. Maybe you did have it in the spring presentation when we looked at the 21 data. This is a new slide?
That is a new slide, you are correct.
Okay, so if that's the case, do you have any, so do we know like how we're trending from the last presentation with regards to this data?
I'm sorry, I can certainly share you with that. I'll have to
Okay.
add it and pull it. I have it in my files,
Okay.
I just don't have it on the slide. I just know that people had asked specifically where that breakdown was
Got
for basic. So if we go back a slide, it's sort of here, when you look at that 21, you can see where we were, I don't have the breakdown on that slide with the basic and below basic, but in 2021, for example, for third grade ELA, the total proficient and advanced was 78%. For 2022, it was 69.7, and you can see it if you look in those 2 columns there for 21 and 22, you can see the overall for advanced and proficient. I don't have the breakdowns in these
No
slides
worries.
for that, but we certainly obviously have that.
Follow up, thank you.
Okay, let's see. Moving on to then the next section is fifth grade. So taking a look, this information is the fifth grade trend data for 2018, 2019, 2021, and 2022. I take a little bit of note here when we're looking at on the left is the ELA and the right is the math with the darker blue. It's pretty consistent with over the last couple of years with ELA. One of the things I did notice looking at this data is a little bit of an upswing from 21 to 22 with the math scores. And the information that I saw earlier today that had been posted on the PDE website indicates all of the schools in Pennsylvania, based on grade level, based on subject area. And just taking a look at, for our data, I actually have it just one more page over, but for ELA, for fifth grade, we were in the top 12% of the state. And then for the county, we were in the top third. For the math scores for grade 5, we were in the top 13% for the state, and again, the top third in the county. So although some of our scores may not look at the proficiency levels we would hope for, in that comparison, we are doing pretty well as far as the achievement of our students in comparison to other schools across the state and within our county. This same slide here is for grade 6 ELA and math trends. So taking a look, it's very similar looking to the fifth grade data overall as far as the bounce back a little bit for the math. And you can see it appears that the 2022 data for the ELA also kind of jumped back up to where it was in 2018 and 2019. I'll just go ahead while you take a look here. This is similar to the previous slide when I broke it down for ELA for 5th and 6th grade ELA and then 5th and 6th grade math. You can see the overall proficiency and advance for both 2019, 2021, and 2022 by comparison to the state in 2022. For the ELA scores for the state, for 6th grade we were in the top 4%. In the county we're in the top 13%. Grade 6 for math was in the top 5.5%, and for the county, we're again in the top 15th% of the county. This next slide represents that breakdown between below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced, again for ELA and math, both 5th and 6th grade. So I'll give you a second to take a look at that. This next section is the grade 7 ELA and math trends. Again, we're taking a look at the same types of slides, ELA being on the left, math being on the right. One of the data points that I recognize is that our math scores in 7th grade still need some rebounding, and there could be a lot of reasons for that. Some of the things that we're doing, though, we have a new support person in place in the 7th grade math support. We are also using our NWEA and ExactPath to bring in and to kind of look at that information for students to help our students continue to grow. Very specifically, though, taking a look at our 7th grade results, you can see again where we ranked percentage compared to the state. And for grade 7 ELA, for the state, we were in the top 4%. In the county, the top 13%. And then for math, even though we have some room to grow for our math scores, we were still in the top 5% in the state and the top 25% in the county. This next slide represents the grade 8 ELA math and science trends. Again, looking over the course of several years now, looking at our data, we want to make sure that we're really focusing in on supporting our students in those math scores for PSSA. One of the things that I want to note is all of our students that are enrolled in grade 8 take our 8th grade PSSA. Every student in 8th grade does that. Some of our students also are enrolled in the Algebra 1 class, so they're taking the Keystone. They're not necessarily taking an 8th grade math course. So that's one of the things that we've looked at over time, just looking at our student performance in each of the coursework. But just taking a look at this data, it does appear that there was a bit of a rebound based on the 21 to 22 data, but hasn't quite gotten back to that level before those COVID years. This next slide breaks down again, looking at proficiency from 19, 21, and 22 with the comparison to the average of advanced and proficient in the state for 2022. Again, looking at where we were in the state, the top 5% in ELA, the top 25% in the county for ELA. Math was in the top 9% of the state, and in the county, we're in the top half of the county. For the science scores in the state, we're in the top 3%, and the county was in the top 10%. And again, I don't have these on the slides because quite literally, I think it was about 5:30 when I checked again, and it was there. I can certainly share that information again. Before I move on to the next whole piece, these are the 7th and 8th grade results. Again, just taking a look at that basic and below basic, proficient and advanced by grade level and subject area. Before I move on to the Keystone information, any questions about the PSSA data? Sometimes it's easier to take a question now, and if not, I can take questions at the end.
Thank you for all of this, by the way. If I don't say that at the end,
No problem.
because I know how time-consuming it is to gather all this data and to spend that time to you and your team. And this is, I did want to, tell you what you already know, is that this is absolutely the learning loss that we've been talking about as a nation, not just as a district. This demonstrates there in our state, across the board, the learning loss that has occurred. I think, and we are not immune to it. And I think we've put in a lot of effort to prevent some of that learning loss to occur, but also now I know that you guys are diving into pockets of this information and looking at ways to bring this up. Why, get the students that are on the cusp of basic to proficient and what we can do. And I know because we're part of the conversations at the curriculum committee meetings, but I know also behind the scenes you guys are, though we've done well, you're not satisfied, and we'll continue to work at it. I do hope either, if not now, at the end of your presentation, that you are able to share, other than the fact that we have a new 7th grade math support person in place and that you're looking at the data with the NWEA, with that, what are the things that we have done or we are doing as a district to continue to grow, because we want to do better, I know. So.
Thank you. Yes, at the end of the slides, I have a couple of things, and I know that Dr. Murray will present again at committee in January a little bit more about the learning loss plan and the remaining expenditures that we have from the ESSER funding. But absolutely, thank you, Dr. Wright.
And Ms. Gardy, I think what I'm trying to reconcile in my mind right now is when I look at these numbers, and I'm actually looking at the presentation that was done in March for the previous, time frame, but you look at the spring forward to state comparison, and the numbers. I mean, in some cases, and when we're talking as big as like a 10% increase in how our students are performing relative to the state. And again, we expect our school district to perform better relative to the state, but I don't want to minimize the fact that we are making significant gains from that standpoint. But then I look at something like on the previous slide where 8th grade math, we have 50%, right? So here, going back to just to reinforce what Dr. Wright was mentioning, I'd love to hear that at the end.
The next section is the Keystone exam data. And we're going to talk about the literature, Algebra 1, and biology. So just for clarity's sake here, these scores represent all the test takers that took the spring administration. Sometimes there are numbers that are banked in the Future Ready. Sometimes students retake them in the winter. So this is just representative of all the scores from the either 2019 spring administration, 2021, or 2022, because sometimes, looking at different data sources means different things. So I just wanted to be clear on where these numbers came from. But taking a look at what our students did in the spring administration, most of our students in that spring administration take the literature exam in 9th grade. Algebra 1 is, again, all of these are end of course exams. So whatever year the student was enrolled in Algebra 1 is the year that they would take that exam. And then in biology, most of our students take biology in 10th grade. So just that's a representative data sample from the data. So taking a look, again, looking at the information based on the literature scores was 78.6, Algebra 1 was 63.9, the biology is 79.7, and then that comparison to the state average, and then that difference over that. So just as Dr. Wright and Mrs. Hermans had indicated, there are areas that we want to make sure that we're continuing to focus on, looking at how our students are doing, making sure that we're planning for some tutoring or support that we have for our students in place should they not have hit that proficiency during that first testing administration that they took in the spring. This is the breakdown, again, just like those previous slides, just taking a look at where those students fell below basic, proficient, or advanced. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about how to make sure our students hit those proficiency benchmarks. Should they, when they take that assessment, they can take it again. Like I mentioned, that second administration, sometimes even a third. We do have tutoring in place for many of our Keystone courses, and teachers are working through that. You'll see that sometimes there are people on the agenda for approval for tutoring. That's what that's representative of, to continue to provide support to our students. So the next section is cohort data. So the other data that I had just shared was the trend data based on that grade level. This cohort is actually the same students each year that have taken assessment. So the first set of students that I have listed here are current ninth graders. They're the class of 2026. So taking a look at this is how they have fared over the last years from 2017 to 2022. So taking a look at this, you can see where they were back in third grade. I put the little star in between their fifth and seventh grade years, looking at where that would be the 2020 year where they did not take the assessment. So you can see, again, that trend that we have seen is the drop down in math. One of the things that we do have to look at with scores is the expectation of student proficiency does increase getting into 8th grade compared to the 3rd grade. So that line, if you will, if you were comparing it to a sports analogy, you would have to be faster in 8th grade than you were in 3rd grade. But just thinking about that, we're still looking at a lower proficiency level in the math than we would want. What I wanted to share here was taking a look at the comparison. So just to be clear on what I'm doing here is this information is our information, both ELA and math. On this next slide, I have ELA compared to the state compared to our scores of ELA. So the state is the green, our scores are the blue. So kind of just looking at that same trend back and forth. So let me just go back one again. If you take a look at where we were for our ELA scores, and then we're looking ahead here, just kind of where that trend line looks. So we're looking at, there's definitely a dip in the state data in that 2019 year, kind of a little bit better in the 2021 year, a little bit better in the 2022. And our data sort of represents that same trend line when we look at that comparison to the state. And that is the comparison to ELA. And then over here, this is the math comparison. So again, taking a look, if we look at that trend line, you can see our data definitely dips from 3rd grade to 8th grade, but so does the state. So again, it's a comparison, it's a data point and understanding of where the trends are. It doesn't necessarily give us all the answers, but it definitely gives us a point of reference, knowing that students overall outperform themselves in 3rd grade as compared to by the time they get to 8th grade. So that's the information that we really need to look at, individual student by student, understanding how they're performing in their classes. And this next section is the class of 2027. So again, they have the data from 2018, 2019, 21, and 22. They're our current 8th graders. So you can kind of see where they've trended over time. This next class is the class of 2028, so there are current 7th graders, and you can see their data from 2019, 2021, and 2022. So you can see by the time they took their 6th grade PSSAs, their scores did rebound more towards what they were back when they were in 3rd grade as compared to when they were in 5th grade for math especially. And the last, this is actually not pre-pandemic data because this is our current 6th grade group. Their first testing year was in that 2021 school year as a 4th grade group, and then as a 5th grade group, you can see where they fell both years there. The last section I wanted to just talk about, this is the Future Ready PA Index. This is a public-facing site. As I mentioned earlier, this morning I did not see it all published, and as of this evening it was. So this really, what this does is it gives state measures about proficiency for proficient or advanced, both on PSSA, Keystone, for ELA, math and science. They're really looking at demonstrating growth for that ELA math and science content, as well as making sure that we're working through getting more advanced students in those subject areas. The other section of the site also talks about on-track measures, specifically for English language arts growth, English language growth and attainment, looking at regular attendance. They want to look at early indicators of success for grade 3, and that's for reading, and then early indicators of success for grade 7 for mathematics. There's also a section labeled college and career measures. They really look at career standards of benchmarking. There's a 4-year cohort for graduation, a 5-year cohort for graduation, some information about industry-based learning, industry-based competencies, whether or not there's a rigorous course of study, and post-secondary transition. So that information is out on the site, and I have a slide here that when we post this, everyone will be able to have access to those links to get to that information. Just kind of going back as a reminder, when we're thinking about what we talk about as spring forward learning, really it's the focus of student learning with curriculum assessment, instruction, and management. Really thinking about the mindset of the whole child, the whole student, looking at their social emotional learning, their collaboration and connection with family, with other students, with their teachers. These are the pillars that we build everything upon to focus and build for our students. So really thinking about where we were and what we're talking about, our points of pride really are the comprehensive planning team had identified action steps, which we are in the midst of working towards. We have that learning loss plan that addresses tutoring. We have summer programs, social, emotional, and mental health resources are being provided to our students. Our students really were high achieving by comparison to other schools across the state. We recognize that COVID did have an impact on the data. With the learning loss supports that are in place, we're starting to see some of that rebounding based on those scores. And additionally, I know that's really small to read, and I know we were checking it earlier if I could read it from here, but really focusing in on the comprehensive plan. These are our priority areas. We had talked about these. Dr. Murray had presented on these before, and when I talked last, I guess it was June, we talked through a little bit of the things that we're doing, so I'm not going to reiterate every piece that I had shared before, but really looking at, for mathematics is one of our anchor areas, really looking at all buildings will meet or exceed that 2030 PSSA proficiency target for math. And they're making some adjustments to those targets as we speak. The goal, too, is also to ensure all curriculum documents are standards aligned and eligible content is taught prior to the PSSA. So as Dr. Bright was asking, what are we doing internally to make sure that we're supporting our students, making sure that really the curriculum and the materials that we're providing our students align to exactly what we should be doing by end of year. And then the third goal here is using that benchmark data to establish a system of intervention for students in math. We're beginning that process. We're in year 1 of that comprehensive plan, really doing some data analysis, working with their building principals as they're working on their building plans. The second goal is systems of intervention, so really establishing a district system, really fully ensuring that all students get the implementation of supports that they need. We're talking about multi-tiered systems of support, and making sure that we also looking at disaggregated data to identify and close achievement gaps for students in different pockets. And we're not just talking about students that have been lower achieving, we're also making sure that our highest achieving students are also continuing to grow, which is really important as well. And the last priority that we have from our comprehensive plan is making sure that we're focusing on inclusive practices with special education, really increasing the percentage of special education students receiving support and services in the regular and general education settings, really thinking about that least restrictive environment, making sure that we're really focusing in on supporting students in our general education programs. As I mentioned, I have linked here, which obviously you're not linking from here, but when we post this, you'll have the links to where to get that PSSA the Keystone exam data and PSSA information. That'll link right to that site where you'll be able to see all the information. There's a Future Ready PA glossary, also the Future Ready Index, and there's family and teacher resources. And the last piece I had really was just, did you have any questions? And I want to address, I guess what Dr. Wright and Mrs. Hermans were asking. More specifically, one of the things that we're doing is working with our teachers. We have monthly meetings with our 5-6 math and ELA teachers, so our curriculum supervisors are leading those with our instructional coaches. We also have what we call PLCs, professional learning communities, in grades K to 4, really focusing in on building principles, essentially establish the schedule, and then our curriculum supervisors and instructional coaches go along and support the building, looking at data, looking at instructional practices, looking at resources, so that they can really work and build those lessons alongside teachers to make sure that they're supporting them. Across the district, our building principals have been leading data team meetings and really digging in and looking at where the students are, but also looking at teacher-specific data, making sure that teachers are growing their students as they expect them to. So those are all things that we've been doing throughout last spring and then into this fall, making sure that we're supporting our students. So I'll stop here. If you have any specific questions, I can certainly answer.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone on the board who had a question? And Mrs. Motzer, Dr. Motzer.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation because it was very clear and easy to understand. And I just wanted to comment that PSSAs are one measure and only one measure. It's a snapshot. It's a snapshot from last spring. So although it's easy for us to look at this beautiful data on all of these graphs and reflect on our district as a whole, I want all of us to realize that there are so many other measures that teachers are collecting on a daily basis that they're using daily to inform instruction. So although PSSAs, like I said, are easy for us to look at and compare our performance across the state, it's just one small measure, and I want to keep that in perspective. So thank you. Thank you to everything that you and all the teachers are doing daily to support students and not just on PSSA days.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Zalewski?
So thank you. That was very detailed. I do have a couple questions, though. So I know one of the things we had asked in the past was you had given us comparisons with the state data, and I do hear you adding in the county data, which just became available. That was for the PSSAs mostly, correct? Do you have anything for Keystone at all with how we do in comparison to our neighboring districts and how that's happening?
I do have that, and that actually became available this afternoon. The tricky part of that compared to the slide that I had prepared was that is the information that gets banked. So if I was a 9th grader and I took the lit exam and I didn't pass, I could take it again in 10th grade, and that gets held till 11th grade. That one link will actually take you to that, and it's every school district. I can certainly share that with you. I didn't want to convolute what I had here tonight because it wouldn't be comparing apples to apples here. So I didn't put that there. Compared, like all the PSSA data is that particular group of students in that particular moment. The Keystone data is not. That's what happened last year. There was some confusion about some scores were banked and some were the actual that happened in the spring of 2021. So I didn't have that up there for that reason, but that one file that the state posted today is there, but it'll say all students and they all say 11th grade, and we know that students all don't take them in 11th grade. They could take it all the way back in 6th grade if they were taking Algebra 1 in 6th grade. So that would be misleading based on the information I shared tonight, but that's certainly available for anyone to look at.
Okay, that's good. I also noticed that, throughout the whole presentation, pretty much, and we know this, right, that the math is an issue. And there have been a lot of efforts to address that and remediate that. But then when they take the algebra Keystone, did we see that? Was I the only one that saw that number spike? Did you guys see that number spiked? So something's happening, right? Because there might be some, I don't want to say regression, but there might be a slowdown maybe in the acquisition of some of the math skills, but at some point something is connecting because they wouldn't have that high rate of success on the Keystone if they weren't getting it. Can you comment on that at all?
I can't tell you specifically about the test construction. What I can tell you is when we look at our NWEA data, and that's nationally normed, when you look at a 3rd grade, that's what I gave the analogy about running. If I run and I'm expected to get faster over time, I think what they did when they gave the cut scores for 8th grade, or even starting in 5th grade, but the cut scores, it's basically the students have to be better at math over time from 3rd grade. So if you were an average student in 3rd grade, by the time you get to 8th grade, you look like you're a below average student because of the cut score. Now, with that said, these are the 8th grade standards, the expectations of what 8th graders need to do. So what we're doing very specifically is looking at, do our curriculum maps align exactly where the anchor standards tell us they need to be, and what skills do they need to develop? So getting to the algebra piece, that is a little bit, yes, they need all those background skills, but it might be very specific, let's just say rounding decimals as compared to solving an equation. So those are different skills that students may or may not have. We do have that very specific information based on the standards and based on those anchors. So that's Dr. Reinheimer, who is our curriculum supervisor for secondary mathematics, has been focused in on that, working with all the way 5 to 8, really looking at that data. One of the things we're trying to strengthen is making sure our scope and sequence works from 5th to 6th to 7th to 8th grade, really making sure that we're building upon what students are experiencing K to 4 all the way up through 8th.
And then this might be more a question for Dr. Murray too. So we had talked about reviewing all of the resources that we're using, and I'm sure you're doing that in curriculum and talking about in curriculum and technology. And then we were using a lot of ESSER funds, and even tonight there are things on the agenda to be approved using more of the ESSER funds. One of the concerns I think that many of us had before was that we were using that money to have these initiatives and address this learning loss and do these different things. When that's done, are we going to be able to carry on, especially with the remediation in math and continuing with that deep dive into what's happening? Has there been discussion about how we're going to address that?
So I can answer one part, and then Dr. Murray can talk about the ESSER funds. I think some of the things that we're doing with our staff really has no additional cost other than obviously we're here employed, working year over year with teachers, and teachers are working with students. I'm not looking at that point for any additional resources. One of the things that Dr. Reinheimer has done with 5-6 as a book study. So they're working very specifically on a book study. So Mrs. Nunneviller purchased that book for the teachers to work through that. So there's a small cost there. But those types of things that we're working on in curriculum review and writing does not cost additional funds. Now, part of what you asked, I think, is where do we fall in the curriculum cycle, and that will the next academic year, will be in a review for grades 5 through 8 for math. And then I believe it's the following year, don't quote me on that, I don't have it in front of me, but the following year would be the K to 4 review. So those types of things are kind of set in our budget cycle, but we don't necessarily need new resources to make revisions to the curriculum. There are plenty of available resources, for either free or realigning the ones that we have in order to better serve our students. As far as the ESSER funding, though, tutoring and things like that, Dr. Murray would have to respond to that.
Sure, I can speak to that. So that is one of the challenges with the ESSER funds, is that we know it's going to drop off, and we've been very careful with how we're allocating that fund, those funds, so that we're very aware of that. One of the activities, for example, is ExactPath. That's something that we are using the ESSER funding to pay for, but Mrs. Gardy did work in a continuation plan to be able to build that into the curriculum budget, so something like ExactPath won't fall off when that money goes away. Programs such as Summer Rams, though, is something we are going to have a conversation about, because all of our Summer Rams has been 100% funded through the ESSER funding. It is an expensive program. We do feel it's been effective. Our families have gotten a lot from it. And we, as you mentioned, it is on tonight as well for another year. But that's something that we as a district will have to decide if we want to continue it. We would need a plan to be able to do that. Some of the other pieces, like tutoring, is also another aspect that we would have to have a discussion about whether or not we would want to continue that. I think the hope, though, is that we're using this money for purposeful interventions now, so that it is not a long-term need. The other piece I wanted to mention with the comprehensive plan is our second goal is focusing on a system of intervention. And the goal of that is to build systems within our regular functioning day that really supports students when they're struggling. And that's good practice with or without ESSER funding. So that is something that we look forward to having regardless of the ESSER funding, and would be more so based on the comprehensive plan.
Okay, thank you. Both.
Yes, well, this question may be too granular, so if it is, feel free to, you know, I can retract the question. But, you know, focusing on that 8th grade math score, I know that, for example, in 7th grade, you know, our curriculum department, based on various data points, is making a recommendation to families as to whether students should, you know, get additional support in math and or reading. And it's my understanding that they're able to basically turn that down in 7th grade for other curriculum, other options. Whereas maybe like in 8th grade, I don't think that's actually the case. I think like, hey, if we're identifying you as someone who could really benefit from additional individualized instruction in math or reading, that we're going to help you get there in 8th grade before you get to the high school and things start really becoming finalized and documented. So I guess my question is, if that is in fact accurate and the case, do we find that families are taking up the recommendations of the district at 7th grade when the table stakes are low, in terms of like getting students the additional support then before it becomes too late? Like what are we seeing, if at all, with regards to that?
I'd have to look a little bit more specifically at that piece. I do know that there's a lot of times that conundrum about when you take algebra. When does algebra come in? And I think that we saw maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there was a big push to get algebra done really early. And that's across the state, not just here. But there was a push to get algebra done early, and that has now since shifted a little bit, so there's not as much of a push there. I can look a little bit deeper into whether or not, I can't speak to whether or not those recommendations are being followed or not. But I do think, to your point earlier, that it is interesting when you look at the 8th grade data and you look at those proficiency scores, they're shocking sometimes. But then when you look at the algebra, it just forces us to dig a little bit deeper into, like Mrs. Gardy said, those cut scores and the impact of that. But to Mrs. Mozer's point as well, we have a lot of other data points that we triangulate this with. So this is one snapshot. So we're looking at what's called PVOS data, which shows us how students are growing over time. And is that telling us the same story? And that's part of those the building data teams that are kind of peeling back and having the conversations about individual students. So I'll look more into the actual recommendation piece if we're seeing that. So I couldn't speak to that part, but.
Thank you.
And I do know we've had the discussion too, that we are looking at our curriculum specifically and at aligning it there, and to just, to talk a little bit more about that with the Keystones. When we have our students that are qualifying for algebra, taking that group that are qualifying in 7th grade and 8th grade and directing them toward algebra skills, we're not necessarily giving them the reinforcement of the skills that would show up on the PSSA. So that's where I know you've been having the discussion about how we align our curriculum so that the students that are going into the algebra also still get the reinforcement of the skills that be tested on in the PSSA. So and it's not just Spring-Ford, it's across the board. So thank you. Anyone else on the board?
I just have one follow-up question. It kind of made me think, yeah, so with the Summer Rams program, the tutoring, those are things that have been funded by ESSER. Could you, with the budget coming, I know we have a budget presentation tonight and the budget will be coming, can you get the board, and maybe through Mr. Rizzo, a list of those items that ESSER specifically has covered in curriculum, and then share that with us so that we could see that?
I actually presented that at the curriculum committee, so I can easily get that.
Okay,
for you.
yeah, if that, okay.
And that highlights the pieces that you'd like to keep.
Yes.
Right.
And my plan, last curriculum meeting, we presented kind of a status of the learning loss plan and where we were and what we were using. And our hope is we have a balance still of money that we have to spend that's allocated for learning loss. I wanted to do kind of an audit and spend down to see where we are first, and our goal is in January to come back with a proposal of how we're going to use the rest of that money.
I'm sure I was going to hear that tonight then from Dr. Wright, so thank you. Jumping the gun a little bit.
That's okay. All right. If there's no other board comment, then thank you very much, Mrs. Gardy, and we will move on to our third presentation for the evening with Mr. Fink. our Chief Financial Officer, to present the 23-24 proposed preliminary budget for the Springford Area School District. Thank you.
Good evening. I hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving holiday. Oh, look at that. It's on the screen. Good. So tonight we're going to go through the proposed preliminary budget for the coming school year, 23-24. Again, proposed preliminary. We're following the guidelines or the timeline for, I went the wrong way, for Act 1. So again, you probably hear me say a few times throughout tonight, we're looking at some checkbox items here so we can stay on schedule. Drop that down there. So look, our agenda, we're going to go through that timeline that I just mentioned. Challenges in preparing the budget, which might be a slide a number of you have seen before because they're typically the same this time of year. We'll go through the expense and the revenue sides of the ledger, at least how they look in our extended forecast, which is what this preliminary budget is based on, and then, of course, next steps. So the budget timeline. So we're doing the proposed preliminary budget presentation tonight to be adopted by the board at the board meeting on January the 23rd. The 2 steps prior to that, obviously public inspection, available for public inspection, and notices in the papers and such, those are required by law that we do them 20 days and 10 days ahead of that adoption, respectively. Following that, we will also put out our intent, which again is another notice, to submit to PDE for referendum exceptions. We'll do that filing for those exceptions. We'll report back, of course, what that is in committee. We're looking, at least as it's scheduled now, we're looking to present the proposed final budget and its adoption at the work session meeting in April on the 17th. And then, of course, with the anticipation of having, or the goal to having the final budget adopted on May the 22nd at that meeting, and the purpose of having the proposed final budget adopted at the April 17th is we have to have it has to be done 30 days ahead of the final budget. Note that the final budget can be changed anytime until you adopt it. So once we do the proposed final, we can still make changes to it as we go forward. So the challenges are always the challenges of doing it this time of year is we don't have a lot of operating data. We're 4 months into the fiscal year, 2 months into the operating year, with the students in school. To see really how the 22-23 budget is taking traction. While we go through that in committee and we're seeing most line items are marrying up pretty well with the actual to budget, we're still early to see if that trend actually stays put. Also, the state likes to change things all the way up until midnight on June 30th, sometimes beyond that, so that's always something to consider, but we'll keep an eye on. I think the new governor has said he'll be putting his budget out in March this year, or his proposed budget in March, of course, which won't be anywhere close to what the actual is, but we will keep an eye on that as well. So now let's take a quick look at the major items on the expenditure side, the changes. Again, most of the changes that we look here in our forecast model are done formulaically. The groundwork will start to get done in my office when I leave here tonight, actually before that, but we'll start hitting all the departments and the buildings and such when we return from the Christmas break, and start really sharpening our pencils then. But as usual, the wages, the personnel costs account for about 70% of the total budget. We're looking at just organic growth on the expense side of almost $2 million, a little bit under that, just for normal wage increases and step movement through the salary plan. About $1.5 million of that is on professional wages. A little under $500,000 of that is on support. Formulaically, we've added in some additional personnel, about $350,000 on the professional, about $317,000 on the support side. Again, that's done formulaically. I believe that Mrs. Lease and her team will be going out. They usually do that in the January, February timeframe to see what the actual building needs, and then all of that gets recalculated. Then we go down to item number 2 there, taxes and benefits. Obviously, the biggest contributor there is, as it always is the PSERS retirement contribution. The state did increase that contribution that the district has to pay from 35.26% of total wages to 36.12. Doesn't seem like a big chunk, but when you apply it on a $70+ million line item, it gets big. So overall, that would add about $1.6 million to the budget. Then also looking at our health benefits, that's going to add another $500,000. At least that's what I'm looking at right now. That's about a 3.3% increase over what we have in the budget currently for 22-23. That is the trend pre-COVID, so we're still watching what post-COVID trend is. That number may change, but we'll keep an eye on that as well, as I said in committee. Also payroll taxes, again, with the increase in the wages, you get an increase in the payroll taxes, so that follows suit. Items that are non-personnel related, again, a lot of these are formulaically done either based on inflationary increases, although some are based on contractual commitments. So when I look at these, I'm looking at about a little over $700,000 for special education services, transportation about $660,000, and so on down the line. Again, a lot of those estimates are just that, they're estimates. So as we go down and deeper into the ground level work, those numbers will also change. Again, like I said, we're going through a checkbox item now for Act 1. So now when I look at everything piled up together and comparative to the final budget of this current school year, what you're looking at, I mean, we can look at the numbers and get blown away, but I look at that bottom right-hand column and I look at 4.65% growth. That's not terribly far out of line to what we've been trending in the past few years. Usually it's around 3 or 4%, right in that neighborhood. So it's a little bit taller. Again, preliminary numbers. Everything's going to change as we get down to the ground level and looking at that. If I look on the revenue side of the ledger, and again, looking at just the major items, real estate taxes, organic growth, about 1.5% is typically organic growth that we have here. That would be about $1.8 million. Delinquent tax collections, we never really had a delinquent tax problem, like a large delinquent tax problem, like thankfully that some districts have. So our inventory there has stayed pretty stagnant, so we're expecting very, very small increase there, under $100,000. On the state side, the basic education funding subsidy, about $175,000. Transportation, again, all of this is going to come down to what the state says, and we said we don't know until the 11th hour for that. But the biggest contributor there on the state side is going to be the subsidy for the PSERS retirement and the FICA, which is based on the increases that we had in the wages. So spend more, you get a little bit more back on the other side. Federal, you guys were just talking about ESSER funding. We're expecting that to drop off as those programs start to wind out. The biggest pieces that we have left right now do relate to the learning loss stuff that Dr. Murray was alluding to. And then in September of '24, I think we're kind of done. So if I look comparatively at what we have for the revenues, again, I'm looking at that middle section there. I'm looking at about 1.33% of organic growth versus 4.6% of expense growth. So that's where our differences always come into. The expenses tend to go a little bit quicker than the revenue side of things. So when I look at the two together, again, checkbox item, we're about $7.9 million of a budget gap that we'll be looking to fill up. And that's what happens in the next phase of this. So again, this is a preliminary budget. The final will likely look a lot different once we hit the ground running in January. Just to close and to make everyone aware, the ACT index this year is 4.1%. So the maximum amount of a tax increase would be that much. It's important to note that last year it was 3.4%. The year before that it was 3%. So you can see where that trend is kind of going up. This number is this number for a reason. A lot of it has to do with inflation. So keep that in mind as we go forth. Inflation impacts the school district as much as it does any other business. Referendum exceptions, my estimate for those once they come back would be about $2 million, maybe a little bit north of that. Again, and that would be an amount that could be put on top of that 4.1% if the need arises. So the next step, the big next step right here for the board is the adoption of the proposed preliminary budget at the January meeting, so we can get that filed and check that box with the state. For us in administration and in the building levels, it will be compiling and putting our budget books out, getting them back, and recompiling for our committee meetings for further discussion in progressing this through. It's going to take a number of months to put all that together, but I expect that we'll have a pretty good idea by March about where we're likely going to end up. With that, any questions?
Thank you very much for all that information. I know you have a lot of work that you've done and a lot more that you have to do. So appreciate that. Is there anyone on the board who had any questions?
I have questions. So just a few. These estimates that you create here, can you just elaborate a little bit on, well, they are only ballparks, only estimates, because we haven't sat down, you haven't gotten the true numbers yet of what's needed and things like that. Are you basing that on your past observation or what have you from previous years?
Yeah, much of it is done on estimates. So there are some trends that we follow that we see. But a lot of it's going to come down to, as we said before, 70% of the total budget is personnel costs. So it depends on what happens there. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm not sure, how many positions will need to be added, if any. I don't know that either. But all those things will come out in the wash, likely in the February timeframe when Mrs. Leese and Mr. Rizzo and Dr. Murray and Dr. Giambattista begin talking about that together.
So that would be really the time-sensitive stuff that those guys will do, and then share that information with you, which you will bring to the Finance Committee and will then come here.
Correct.
So I just want to go on record saying that we need to go through this budget as a committee line by line. And I have asked the chair of the Finance Committee and then Mr. Fink at the last Finance Committee meeting. I've asked the chair twice, and at the last Finance Committee meeting, I also asked, and now I just want it to really be on record and document it. I want the Finance Committee to be able to see the constants, that 70% that doesn't change, right? I get that doesn't change. We need to see it as a committee. We need to take this budget in chunks so that we can do that and do it effectively and do our due diligence. So when we get to the end, we're all in it together. We're all there together. We understand where the number is coming from, and we've gone through all of that. So if we could look at those pieces of the budget that are constant, that are not going to change, if we could look at those in January, and then as in February we get closer to those more time-sensitive pieces when we're looking at backfilling retirees or looking at new hires, we'll be able to have a fresh perspective, a fresh mind to look at those without being overwhelmed by this massive whole budget, because we've already looked at the constants, the things that aren't going to change. So I just formally want to request that we have that opportunity in January at the Finance Committee meeting to be able to review the constants, the things that aren't going to change. And I want to say thanks in advance for all that work you're going to do to get that number way down. Thank you.
Any other board comment? On the revenue slide, when you mentioned that, I don't recall you making mention of Plan Con. That was on there. Could you explain to people what Plan Con means, a kind of a unique term?
Sure. So, yeah, Plan Con is a subsidy that districts get from the state. It's kind of a give back on their bond borrowings. So if you built a building and you could apply for Plan Con money, and they would reimburse you for a portion of that. That was put on moratorium, Mr. Fitzgerald, back in like 2016, somewhere in that neighborhood. So no one has had the ability to do that since then, and we're kind of just winding, it seems, out of that program. The reason for that revenue drop that I had there, and I'm glad you brought that up, I did mean to mention that, I had it in my notes too, is because we have 2 issuances of bonds that we will be paying off this year. So that will be done. We will not see any more Plan Con money from that, and that's what that $400,000 was related to. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you. All right.
No comments, just thank you for the work, and I know that this is a big undertaking, especially at this time of year. And frankly, like, I don't have any questions. None of this is a surprise. I think that the conversation that we had in May, you kind of foreshadowed the ACT index being around where it is. So, I think at this point, I have a good feel for where we are and more work to be done, to Mrs. Zaski's point.
All right. So thank you very much, Mr. Fink. If there are no more board questions, then we're going to move on to board and committee reports. And we will start with our student rep report.
So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our student rep report for November. With that, we'll delve into some past events that happened recently. So we had Unity Day on October 31st, which was hard to believe, like a month ago. The marking period also ended on the 3rd of November, and the report cards were released on the 16th. We also had the fall play Velveteen Rabbit on the 5th of November. We celebrated Veterans Day on the 11th and honored the veterans in multiple schools in our district. And fall sports and marching band seasons ended on the weekend of the 12th. We had a multicultural dinner at the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade center on November 18th. And parent-teacher conferences began on the 17th and culminated last week on Monday. And with that, we just have a couple of reminders for students and their families. It is important to view the school-based newsletters and the updates that are given on a weekly basis, whether that be through the high school headlines or the Skyward messages. Feel free to keep an eye out. Thank you.
Yeah, and as for some upcoming events, we have a few this December. To start, we have, well, tomorrow, there's the middle school choir concert. Should be very exciting. We'll also be welcoming Mr. Gavin Lawler as a new house principal. And on top of that, last week and all throughout this week, the Irish Exchange Program kicked off. We have several Irish students from the town of Limerick, Ireland, joining us, and they've been going around the area, looking at some very cool attractions, etc. And come March, I believe, we'll be sending several students from our school to Limerick, Ireland, for them to check out there. And after that, we have the winter concerts coming up. Orchestra is on December 6th. Chorus is December 9th. And band, grades 7 through 12, are December 13th.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any board questions? Thank you. So then we will be moving on to policy, and at our last policy meeting, Mrs. Earl was not there.
Yeah, my policy is not to attend when I'm on vacation, so I defer to Mr. Rizzo.
We didn't have the second reading on that, just saying.
So Mr. Rizzo
Sorry.
will be talking about the policy meeting. Thank you.
That didn't land well. I apologize. All right. Policy Committee met on Monday, November 14th from 6:30 to 7:30. The policies that were discussed included student discipline, school wellness, bullying and cyberbullying, name and classification, membership, and attendance at meetings via electronic communication. As far as where we're going next with those policies, student discipline is on for a first reading this evening. Name and classification and bullying and cyberbullying will likely be on for a first reading in January, pending review from our solicitor. And the remainder of the policies, including those not discussed, which is school calendar and public attendance at school events, will all come back to the committee in January. That's the end of my report.
Thank you very much. All right. If there's no questions, then we'll move on to curriculum and technology. We had our curriculum and technology committee meeting on November 14th. For technology, we are seeking, Mr. Catalano is seeking help as we explore ways to improve our software process. Digital content has grown as a result of modernizing learning, working to integrate technology with curriculum, helping us explore opportunities to make our data integrations more efficient, and help us prepare to deploy one roster and phase out our old way of syncing our data. This is with the CCIU data professional services that we hope to use to improve all of this. So we are, we'd like to prepare to deploy one roster, phase out our old way of syncing our data. We would want to purchase a block of time, 100 hours at a rate of $105 per hour. This would not exceed $10,500 and would be paid out of the 22-23 technology operating budget. This is an action item on tonight's agenda, and the idea being that 60% of our rostering is done over the summer manually, and this is a much more, we believe, efficient way of doing this. This was information through the MCIU, and one roster, Mr. Catalano had looked into it, has been done with 3 other districts. Boyertown, Owen J. Roberts have used this and have been very happy with this, so it would be a much more efficient way of doing our rostering. So, good. And Dr. Murray's giving me the okay on this. So then no to B, also with technology, Mr. Catalano shared information about this email security awareness training. This is one we've been doing because people had asked for an update on this. The product will provide ongoing opportunities to report suspicious emails to technology support to review. Monthly campaigns are sent to staff. The goal is to educate the staff and get the click rate to 0%. The 12-month staff baseline from the summer was at 18% of phishing, and let's see, our all-user campaign had a Fisher-prone percentage of 3.7%. So we went down significantly. We did, the guys did very well on the improving the clicking on the wrong things with this. So we were very pleased with the money that we've spent for this No to B program. So that was just informational. With regards to curriculum, the learning loss plan update was provided. Dr. Murray provided a review of the learning loss plan that was board approved on November 15th in 2021. So this is really when we had tasked Dr. Murray to tell us, what we are doing to prevent or to close that gap with learning loss. Dr. Murray provided information regarding the actual expenditures, projected spending for 22 and 23 school year, and projected spending for the 23-24. The learning loss plan includes requirements to be spent on students' social, emotional, mental health support. Additional funds need to be spent on reading support and intervention. Dr. Murray requested that the community provide input through the survey that has been sent in the weekly update. A recommendation of continuing summer RAMs for the summer of 2024 was also discussed and will be brought to the board for approval. So I believe that's on tonight's agenda. The summer RAMs part of it, yes, correct. So summer RAMs for 2023. Mrs. Garvey provided available data for the summer RAMs 2022 and provided an overview of the plan for this coming summer 2023. The program will run for 2-week sessions during the period of July 10th and August 3rd, and additional information will be provided in the coming months. It was really nice to hear about all of that they felt was effective, and this was information from staff, parents, and the administration, and ways to improve the program for the summer. So the new science standards also are being discussed. The new science standards are across the board in Pennsylvania. Dr. Reinheimer provided information about the new K-12 science standards. Professional development with administrators and teachers will be ongoing as the standards will go into effect not until July 1st, 2025. So the changes to the science, PSSAs, and biology Keystone exam will go into effect during the 25-26 school year. So we see this coming, and we are anticipating it, and our curriculum department is working with our science teachers, with the IU and everything to prepare to push those standards out when they are fully available to be put into effect. And the PA Smart Grant Partnership with Albright College. Dr. Reinheimer provided information about the PA Smart Grant Partnership regarding STEM education and esports. That was pretty interesting. It was Albright, I believe, Albright, or Alvernia, I think it was Albright. Albright University, they had the opportunity, some of the administrators, to go out there and to that and learn more about what they are doing with esports and gaming, and to engage students. They have a great program there. So we took a leadership team there. And there are esports arenas in colleges, and so this was something that it was just really informative to let us know that this is available for something that we may want to look to engage our students in more in the future. Summer pre-K, pre-kindergarten program and screening. Another thing we had tasked the administrators with looking into is Mrs. Gardy provided information about the summer pre-kindergarten program. It will run July 10th through August 3rd at Brook Elementary. Screenings will occur in late May and early June. So anyone who has a child who will be entering kindergarten for next school year wants to pay attention to those dates, and please reach out to the schools if you have any questions. And then renewals for the Typing Pal and Turnitin. So this is on the board agenda for approval. Mrs. Garvey provided information about annual renewals of these products. So these are ones that they felt were effective and worthy of renewing. So in our next meeting will be determined following the board reorganization meeting on Monday, December 5th, 2022. Okay. Any questions, board comment?
I have a question about the summer Rams that you mentioned.
Yes.
And then it's on the agenda. Is that supposed to be summer of 2024?
It is. In the initial learning loss plan, the summer Rams was proposed for 3 years. Excuse me, and it was proposed and approved to run for 3 years. Next summer will be the 3rd year. So what's on the agenda tonight is to run summer Rams a 4th year, based on the leftover. I shouldn't say leftover. The remaining funds that we still have to spend for learning loss.
And I think Mr. Fink had just said that it has to be spent by September of 24, so that would fall in line.
Exactly.
With that, and that 7%, does that cover the 175?
7%. Are you talking about the 7% set aside?
Yeah.
There is, the learning loss has multiple buckets. Within this bucket of learning loss, there's 2 different funds. There's a 7% set aside. It all kind of comes underneath this learning loss. I can share with you the slide that was shared at the curriculum committee, which breaks down each of those buckets and where each of that funding is coming from. Ultimately, it's coming from a combination between the 7% set aside and the overall ARP-ESSER learning loss.
But it'll be covered by the ESSER.
Correct.
Learning
All
loss.
of what's on here for the Summer Rams 2024 would be the 4th year, all 100% covered through ESSER funding.
Okay, thank you.
Can you remind us how many students went through, oh bless you, through summer Rams?
Katie, do you have that number off the top of your head?
I can't find it
For
right now.
2022, we had about 384. I can go back and look at the previous year as well.
That's great, I appreciate it, thanks.
Any other questions from the board? All right. Thank you very much. The committee is the best committee, just saying, since no one else is going to say it. All right, looking at finance. For the finance committee, is that Mrs. Hermans, are you going to present?
Yes, I will
Thank
be
you very much.
presenting in light of Mr. Jackson's absence. So the Finance Committee met on November 15th in the district office conference room, and in attendance was Mrs. Zowski and Ms. Deardorff, myself, committee members. I was stepping in as chair for that meeting as Mr. Jackson was not in attendance, but also we had Mr. Schaefer and Ms. Weingarten on Zoom and, not committee members. So there were 4 items that were discussed in that meeting. Number 1, as usual, the executive monthly reports, the 23-24 Act 1 budget timeline. We'll talk about a possible change to a food service employee status at the 8th grade center, and then an informational item regarding the recent bond offering. So going through the first piece, which is the executive monthly reports, everything is trending as expected. That's pretty much the headline here. Liquidity, revenue, expenditures trending where they would be, with one exception, which is medical claims. So Mr. Fink and Ms. Davidheiser, were discussing the fact that the medical claims were a little higher than expected, and they're watching that closely to determine if it's simply carryover from the prior year or it's more claims from over the summer. So they'll keep an eye on that. As far as assessments, good pacing, real estate transfer taxes, pacing strong year to date, same with earned income tax. The second thing that we talked about was the 23-24 Act 1 budget timeline, which frankly, now that we've given the presentation, is kind of a moot point. So we did go through, talking through that we would have Mr. Fink present at this meeting, 11/28, and then talk through the additional steps on January 3rd, proposed preliminary budget being made available to the public. On the 13th, advertising the intent to adopt the proposed preliminary budget, and then the board vote to adopt the proposed preliminary budget, which, as Mr. Fink stated, is a check mark, just part of the process on January 23rd. Other new business, Mr. Fink explained that there's a desire for a position change for a food service employee at the 8th grade center. This shows up on our agenda tonight as personnel E2. So to give a little context to this, and I'm sure we may have questions when we get there, there's a need for the change because there's an increased load that occurs in the morning when breakfast service overlaps with lunch production. And prior to the addition of breakfast, 2 members of the staff would come in to prep lunch. With the addition of breakfast, 2 members of the staff are needed on the cafeteria line for breakfast service and are not able to prep lunch concurrently. So we're proposing here that there's a change from a 5-hour position for this employee to a 6-hour position, which would make them full-time. We talked about the impact from a finance standpoint, ranging anywhere from a savings of $3,000 to an increased cost of $9,000, really dependent upon the employee's health care benefit needs, whether they're single or they're a family. So, that's a question I have for later to see if we have any follow-up on that, Mr. Fink. But I think the outcome here from a social standpoint is there are students at the 8th grade center who are not getting the breadth or the variety of food at lunchtime, and we know how important their meals here as part of the district are. So, welcome any questions you guys have with that. But before that, one final thing, the 4th item, which was an informational item. So Mr. Fink shared the recent bond offering. I know that when we met in October, there was a question that went to our underwriter at Stiefel, that talked about the total principal being $29 million, yet, we were shooting for a $24.5 million bond offering. So I'm happy to report, or Mr. Fink was happy to report, that we actually got a good discount on that bond offering. So the final pricing came in at $23.27 million, which is about a $1.3 million discount relative to the principal of $24.5 million. So that's a good news story.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board? No? Then we will move on to property, and I believe Mrs. Deardorff, you will be taking that. Thank you.
Sure. The Property Committee met on November 15th at 7 p.m. The ongoing business regarding operations is the PennDOT land acquisition on Black Rock Road. We discussed the updated status of PennDOT's eminent domain acquisition of land connected to Oaks Elementary for the purpose of widening the bridge on Black Rock Road. New business, we discussed the fiscal year 23-24 capital projects that are slated to start at the end of this school year. These projects are in various stages of the RFQ process through CoStars and KPN and will be presented at the upcoming property meetings when ready for approval. We also discussed the fire alarm replacement project at Upper Providence Elementary, which we are waiting on final pricing to be submitted. We also discussed a ninth grade center insurance claim regarding the mechanical failure of a heat pump valve in the auxiliary gym storeroom, which caused some damage to the gym hardwood floor. It was submitted as an insurance claim, and the remediation and drying has been completed. Mr. Hunter is currently working with the adjuster to define scope and with the contractor to develop a repair schedule. We also discussed Springford substitute cleaners and the need for substitute custodial support. Mr. Hunter asked us for consideration to bring back the Springford part-time substitute custodial position. The position already exists in the custodial agreement. And then ongoing business for school police and emergency management. We discussed projects and initiatives, the daily traffic control at the high school and Flex. The Springford School Police and administrators investigated several safe-to-say tips, 18 total, 3 of which were life safety. We discussed fire drills, evacuation drills. ALICE drills were completed and documented per the safe school requirements. Chief Boyer provided security and traffic control and his team when requested. The Safe Schools assessment was scheduled for November 21st. The school police presentation for staff for the Act 55 training requirement. There was an ALICE parent presentation on the 16th at the high school. And the school police attended emergency management training on the 16th. There are no new updates on our PCCD grant and PDE grant that we've applied for, which are for the door replacement, night locks, and digital radios. New business is our cameras update. We're waiting some equipment that are on back order, and they were meeting on the 18th to start preparations for our camera project phase 2. Other business that was discussed was the donation of a Gaga ball pit at the Evans Elementary Home and School in the amount of $8,000. We discussed the idea of naming the 9th grade center arboretum after one of its founders, Gail Wellington. The process will move forward under Board Policy 702.1, requirements for approval. And that's all that I have. Mr. Hunter, do you have anything to add? Did I do a good job?
That was very good. You got everything.
Thank you.
Great, thank
Gaga ball. It's his favorite word.
Thank you very much. Any board questions, comments? Great, then we'll move on to Western Montgomery County Technical Center. Any?
Yep. So I have the,
Mrs. Osowski?
yep, I have the update here. We did have an executive session on Monday, November 7th, prior to the board meeting. We had that at 6:30 to discuss personnel. We had a few one presentation that evening. Ms. Reichert and Ms. King from the Cosmetology Department summarized their recent trip, including an overview of what they had presented. And that was very nice to hear from the staff about their experiences out there. They talked about that. They talked about the students in their classes and provided good feedback about the experience there. Mr. Livingood also reviewed the comprehensive plan with the board. That plan was up for approval at a special meeting which took place this evening at 5 o'clock on Zoom. Prior to this meeting, we reviewed the revisions, just a few, and approved the comprehensive plan for over there. Mr. Livingood and Mr. Holtzman shared their future of the tech school. A PowerPoint and discussion was held regarding the enrollment there. There's been some chatter that it was actually brought to our attention by Pottsgrove that there just isn't space for enough of the students to go. And we've been talking to you about the different programs and when students are turned away or waitlisted or where expansions can be made. So they're continuing to look at that, and that fell under that future of the school there. Dr. Roach advised discussions are happening regarding opening some of those CTC options for students that are also homeschooled. That's coming onto the scene. So we'll be looking at that carefully and figuring out how we're going to manage that. In general, there's some Title IX issues and some threat assessment issues that are arising over there, and processes are being developed to accommodate and address those as they arise. We reviewed also the inclement weather process and urged students that they should not be coming in for their sessions if their homeschool is closed. There's been some pieces in the past where the tech school was open and kids were just driving in the weather, and you know, some of these kids do come from further away. Upper Perk isn't around the corner. We're lucky that it's very close, but that's not the same for everybody. Upper Perk did advise that they will not be doing lunches after this year, so that's going to be something for us to figure out there. And Dr. Roach is unable to make the January meeting, so Dr. Finnerty is going to be there in his place. And then Mr. Holtzman talked about, and this is very exciting, a new application process utilizing CTE 360 for enrollment. This is being communicated out to principals and counselors at sending schools. I think this will be a much more streamlined process in terms of the application process and getting an idea of how many students are enrolled at any given time. We're going to be able to get that in real time, those numbers. So far, well, currently this year we have 42 students out on co-op, which is a good amount, and that's a nice increase from the past. He also introduced Hallie Hall, a commercial arts student who is assisting with creating promotional items, a new logo, items for the newsletter, and made a new Wildcat mascot for over there. So some of the items that were approved, the meeting minutes were approved. Dr. Roach is going to continue on as superintendent for one more year. There were some new hires, and the meeting dates, the finances were approved, and then also the meeting dates for the new year were set. We're just going to have to make sure we take a look at those, and we take a look at our schedule too, so that we make sure we're not scheduling things happening at the same time. So for example, the first meeting here is January 9th, right? Because January 2nd is the holiday after the 1st. That could potentially pose a problem because we typically have committee meetings, policy, curriculum, and technology on that second Monday of the month. We just need to coordinate better because there were some issues this year with scheduling. I want to make sure we try to avoid those conflicts so that we can make sure that Springford has a presence at that table. And we will be meeting again over there January 9th, as I said. So any questions on that? Any further comments on that? Anybody?
All right. No other questions? Thank you very much. And Mrs. Sowski, do you have any information on community relations?
Yep, so we met on Tuesday, November 1st, 6:30. Ms. Crew provided an extensive update following the Chester County IU communication audit, including immediate changes that have been made, such as clarity and weekly updates, website changes, and reproducing successful district publications. Ms. Crew also shared long-term areas of focus to streamline district communications and connect with community members who may not necessarily have school-age children. Mr. Rothermel shared RCTV updates, and as of that meeting, had already covered 36 events and produced 13 spotlight videos. He also took feedback about the new panels we have set up here in the cafeteria for projecting during these board meetings, and angling those and making sure that we're trying to get everybody in focus. We will meet again in February of 2023.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Great. Then we move on to the Legislative Committee. Mrs. Deardorff, any information?
We did not meet in November, obviously. Everything was very much election focused, and we have not yet met for December, or we obviously didn't meet yet for December. But one thing of note is that Governor-elect Shapiro has indicated that he's very willing to work across party lines, and the week before last, he and Austin Davis, who is the Lieutenant Governor-elect, indicated that education will be a top priority of their administration. That's it.
Thank you very much. Right. Then we move on to the MCIU. We did meet prior to the Thanksgiving holiday. There was a job fair for Montgomery County that was on Monday the 21st that they had offered. They had also had a gala with fundraiser, and they are looking to reorganize with their Head Start funding. They're learning, they took on Head Start later than many other counties did, and so they are learning from other IUs on how better to manage the federal funding that's coming in, so to provide more services to our students that would be Head Start before that. And other than that, we talked about, there were some personnel issues that we discussed in exec session. So that's the Montgomery County IU. Mr. Shaver is not here today, so I'm not sure that we have anything from the Pennsylvania School Board Association. That would lead us to the American Legion. Dr. Motzer, thank you.
The Spring City American Legion baseball board meetings were held on October 27th and November 17th. During the meetings, the board discussed the fall baseball field updates, the rehab that needs to happen every fall. They were mostly complete as of that last meeting. As a reminder, the school district and the board share the fiscal responsibility for doing those repairs, such as repairing the field, the batting cage, artificial turf, concession stand repairs. And then the group also talked about a tournament that they're going to be hosting in mid-July. It's the 2023 Region 3 tournament. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, then we would move on to the superintendent's report. Mr. Rizzo.
Thank you. A couple of things. First of all, health and safety plan review, right? As a requirement of the American Rescue Plan and the ESSER funding, we are required to review our health and safety plan every 6 months. We are up for review and possible revisions in February. While I know it's early, January will be here before we blink, and I want to make sure that I have time to get input from the teams based on any revisions the board may deem necessary, so just giving you a heads up on that. We don't have to do it in February. It has to be done by February. Next, some good news. 2023 NAFME, N-A-F-M-E, which stands for National Association for Music Education. Congratulations to senior Sam Brown for his acceptance to the 2023 NAFME All-Eastern Division Band in April 2023. All-Eastern Band is comprised of students from Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Maine, and Vermont. Students had to have been previously participants in the all-state ensembles and complete a successful audition. The last time a Spring-Ford student was selected for the NAFME Band was in 2015, so congratulations to Sam. Speaking of NAFME, congratulations to senior Suniti Srinivas for her acceptance into the 2022 NAFME All-National Honor Mixed Choir. The 22 NAFME National Conference is the premier national event fostering and facilitating collaboration between music education practitioners, researchers, and program leaders across the spectrum of pre-K to 12 and higher ed. The NAFME All-National Honor Ensembles represent the top-performing high school musicians in the United States. We are proud to recognize Suniti for her participation as an Alto 1 in the NAFME All-National Honor Mixed Choir. We would like to recognize and congratulate Suniti for her accomplishments and for representing Spring-Ford Area School District earlier this past November, a couple weeks ago, in National Harbor, Maryland. It's important to note that Suniti was one of 24 students from Pennsylvania that participated in this ensemble. So congratulations to Suniti. Lastly, retirees. We have two, Deborah Moore-Keys, currently an IA at Upper Providence Elementary School with 19 years of service, and then Laura Sanderson, our transportation coordinator, with over 12 years of service. She did, however, work with us through Custer's as a driver and a dispatcher, so she's been with Spring-Ford for a number of years. We're going to miss her tremendously, so congratulations to both of our retirees. Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say, since I kind of bumped the assistant superintendent reports this month, Dr. Murray asked me to send out a reminder that we are collecting feedback regarding learning loss needs. So for more information on that, please check our weekly reports. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. If there are no questions from the board or comments, we move on to the solicitor's report. Mr. Fitzgerald.
Briefly, last month, the PSBA statewide conference occurred up in Kalahari Resorts up in the Poconos. At that same location was the statewide solicitors meeting on Halloween, where the solicitors from across the state got together. They kind of put us in a room separated from all the board members, but we got to kind of compare notes as to what we're seeing across the state. It's good to see what folks in the Pittsburgh area, Erie, if they're seeing things similar to us. Four big takeaways. Title IX continues to be a huge, and I'll call it conundrum for districts right now. They don't know how to handle the regulatory changes in many respects, and they know that there's going to be fairly significant changes coming up in May or June of this year. So there was a lot of discussion around that. Right-to-know issues still are consistently high in a lot of areas. It's not just a regional thing here. It is across the state, and since I was getting talked to some of my colleagues in the Pittsburgh area, maybe even higher there. Special education trends, a lot of what I'll call post-COVID pandemic litigation is on the upswing. It was always a higher area for litigation, but the discussion with a lot of my colleagues was that area is seeing a higher trend. And then collective bargaining, which is not luckily things that we've had to deal with here. We've had good relationships with the association, but there's a lot of new trends in collective bargaining in light of higher inflation, retaining employees, and the like, that has kind of flipped bargaining on its head from what it was maybe 10 years ago when the Act 1 index was at like 1.2. So just interesting to see where everybody is at, and I think it was helpful to get that sense from across the state.
Thank you very much. Any board comments, questions? Any questions, Mrs. Weingart?
Not to jump the gun, I don't know if you had it, we're planning it for the end.
You may go ahead and
The
speak.
president's meeting that we had on November 3rd, I didn't know if that was worth bringing up, not to put you on the spot.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. Did you specifically have any notes you wanted to share?
No, I just wanted to let everyone know that we did host our, how many times a year president's meetings? 3?
Yep.
3 times a year president's meeting. And for those of you who have not heard of that, basically all of the school's homeschool programs are invited, including Education Foundation, SNAP, our music program, booster clubs, all the elementary schools come together and share what they're up to, fundraisers, special events, and it's a really nice time for everyone to kind of learn what's working for them, whether they're vendors they're using for t-shirts, playground equipment, and all kinds of things. So it's always a really nice meeting, and especially because we can do it face-to-face, so you get to put a face with a lot of these really awesome people who spend a ton of time and a lot of heart putting together programs, initiatives, and making really the heart of a lot of the Spring-Ford communities in each of the schools. So I'm really thankful to be a part of that. And did I forget anything?
No, I was just looking through my notes, and thank you so much for reminding me of that, which from the November 3rd meeting. And I do encourage any of it's the President's Council, any of the presidents, vice presidents from the Home and School or the Music Association, SNAP, Booster Club, to attend, because it is a great networking meeting. They all share ideas as like, how did you make so much money at your basket bingo, and other ideas like that really, and it's a great experience. And they are wonderful people who work so very hard for our district, so we thank them. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments? And if not, was that Halloween you all met as lawyers?
Yes.
There's
Apropos.
no irony.
Bunch of lawyers in a room on Halloween. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I didn't want that to go past.
Yes. No costumes.
Yeah, spooky. All right, so that, I believe, concludes our committee meetings, which moves us on to the next part of our agenda, which we will be voting on. So we have section 4, which is the minutes from the previous meetings there.
So moved.
Is there a motion?
Yeah.
And we have a motion and we have a second from Wendy. Did you get that, Mrs. Bickard? Thank you. Any questions or concerns about the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So, Mrs. Bickard, that passes, 7-0 tonight. Thank you. Moving on to personnel, A through H.
You could separate E2, please.
Separating what?
E2.
Separating E2. Also would like, is there a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right. I did also want to mention, if you look at C6, under that, there is an effective date of December 5th for that. That is not noted there. An amendment is not required to the agenda, but we did want to make that clear to all of you that are voting that for C6, the effective date is December 5th. Okay, any questions or discussions on A through H less E2?
General question about recruiting efforts. So, Mrs. Lees, I know that we've had a couple, one at Brook Elementary at the end of October, one last week. Just wanted to see if there was any comment with regards to, you know, how well attended those were and how they went.
I'm sorry, we're getting really bad feedback back here. Could you just repeat your question?
Oh, sure, no
Thank you.
worries. We've had 2 recruiting events since our last voting meeting. So we had one at the end of October, I think October 26th at Brook, and then also one last week at MCIU. I was just wondering how well attended those were and how did they go?
Thank you. Brook Elementary School was, we had about 25, 30 people attend. It was more for support staff positions, working with our vendors, trying to get the community out to meet with our vendors for opportunities. Our vendors were very appreciative. We did get a few people interested in subbing for the district as well, so that was a plus. And then last week at the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, Mrs. Wiesner attended that event, and there were over 100 applicants at that point in time. It was more of a meet and greet, students who are not ready to graduate at this point in time, maybe are going to be December grads or May grads, but just getting the opportunity to get our face out there, get a chance to meet with people, and connect with them in that capacity. We do expect, we will be hosting a job fair at the end of February, Springford will, for professional staff like we did last year. That was very well attended, and we're hoping for the same again.
Thank you.
Any other board questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Looking at under personnel E2, is there a motion? A second? Second. Questions or comments?
So, Mr. Fink was wondering if there was any update. I know that I gave some context in the Finance Committee report, but when we last met, we talked about kind of this range of a savings to a cost to the district of $9,000 depending on healthcare benefits. Also, just wanted to confirm that if we do make this change, the existing position that is out there, that we will not be backfilling that position. That is still the case.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to note is that by changing this from a 5-hour to a 6-hour, we're also talking about, which I put in the board memo 2 Fridays ago, we're also talking about not filling a 4-hour position that Aramark has over there. So we'd be going from a 6-person staff to a 5-person staff with that extra hour. I'm going to turn to Mrs. Lees because I don't think it's appropriate for me to talk about a particular person's status.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
But that's
but the
why
range
there's
still stands.
Yeah, the range still stands.
Okay.
So, and the reason why, and I wanted to make sure that it was clear too, is we talked about a potential of reduction to 3,000. That's because that other position would go away, depending on what the benefit needs are for an employee who takes this 6-hour position.
Thank you.
Down the road. Yep.
Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Moving on to finance. Just a moment. Moving on to finance, A through F. Is there a motion? And a second? Questions or concerns? No questions from the board. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that passes 7-0. Moving on to programming and curriculum, A through E. Is there a motion? And a second?
Can we separate E?
Separating E. So is there a motion for A through D? And a second? And a second from Dr. Motzer. All right, questions and concerns on A through D? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? So A through D passes 7-0. Talking under curriculum A, E. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second? Questions, comments?
I know this went out as a separate message, but I was just wondering if Mr. Catalano, if you could refresh my memory with regards to the benefits to the school district with regards to partnering with the CCIU?
Mr. Catalano is not here
Oh, I
tonight, but that's
apologize.
okay. Dr. Murray is prepared to
Thank
address
you,
that.
Dr. Murray.
I will do my best. I also have Mr. Catalano maybe chatting in with me here in case I miss something. So to my understanding, this is a block of support hours through the CCIU to assist with a method using a program called One Roster, which will help automate some of the rostering programming. Currently, about 40% of our rostering is done automatically, and 60% is done manually. It takes about 3 weeks during the summer where they have kind of a data freeze, where they kind of freeze the system so they can do some of this rollover, and it's a pretty big lift. So what they're looking to do is contract with the CCIU, who has specialists in using the One Rostering program, so that they can bring this program to Springford so that we can then use that as opposed to doing the manual rostering.
And to add to that, the reason that we are going to the CCIU as opposed to the MCIU is that is where the MCIU directed us, was their recommendation, because the CCIU had used this and had success with it with several other districts.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the board? All right. So for E there, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes 7-0. Moving on to conferences and workshops, A through E. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And a second? Second. Any questions or comments from the board? All right. If seeing that there are none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 7-0. So looking on to other business, A, the following policies are submitted for approval. So those are the ones we would be voting on tonight. Correct. Thank you. So we're looking at other business A. Is there a motion? So moved. A second?
Second.
Any questions or concerns or comments? Okay. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 7-0. So B, the following policies are submitted for first read. So that would be policy 218. So that will be further discussed at the next policy committee.
Goes to the next board meeting, not the committee.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I apologize for that. It'll be at the next board meeting then. All right. If there's no discussion about that, we would move on to board comment. The only comment that I would like to make at this time is that our next meeting in December is strictly a reorganization meeting. We just have the one. There are no committee meetings in December. So we have a reorganization meeting, was it December 5th? So I just want to make everybody aware of that. So, Any other board
Yeah, I have a
comment?
question about the calendar for next year. So we keep having conflicts with JOC, when we move something, or, they're the first Monday, and if there's a holiday, we always have that issue in September. But now their first meeting is January 5th, so is ours, because the 9th, because the 2nd is a holiday. So what are we going to do about this?
So, Mr. Rizzo, when we are setting the calendar for the year, how do we go about that?
Sorry, I was taking notes. So as part of the reorg, we approved the 2023 regular meeting calendar. Beyond that, once the board president identifies who the chairs are going to be for each of those committees, then they will establish a schedule which will at some point be shared so we all know when those dates are as well. We will take things like JOC meetings into consideration, whether it's a different day or a different time, so that we can try and avoid those conflicts as much as possible.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing that to the table so we are aware of it moving forward. Great. Any other board comment?
Just in that light, I would just make mention that in January, our meeting will be on the 17th, not the 16th. No? Correct.
Yes, correct.
If you all approve it, yes. Yeah.
All right. If there are no other comments from the board, then we move to public to be heard. If there's anyone in the public who would like to speak, please approach the podium and tell us what area in which you live.
Steve Fry, Royersford, PA. I just wanted to, first of all, thank everyone for the presentations tonight. They were very, very helpful, a lot of useful information. And I also want to thank Ms. Murray for her presentation on learning loss in the committee meeting this month, also very helpful, a lot of good information. When it comes to learning loss, I guess I would like to ultimately see something that will allow the school to say, we have reasonably addressed the learning loss situation, meaning that there's something that defines all the elements of learning loss as a school understands it, whether that be, so for example, there's obviously clearly the educational pieces, which we saw a lot of tonight, but we've also heard that we're implementing SEL to deal with learning loss as well. That's something else, because SEL doesn't really deal with core educational topics, it's something else. And if there are other pieces to this learning loss, to correcting learning loss, I think it would be nice to outline what all those are, what the actions are involved to actually address those, what are the relevant measures that are being used. Ultimately, at the end of the day, can you come out and say, yes, learning loss has been addressed, we're okay now, we're going to move forward normally. So I just think that would be helpful, because otherwise I'm not really sure when this kind of learning loss process ends. I would also say it would be helpful to have something similar for other things like equity, to say, how do we know when a school has achieved equity in whatever that means? Because right now I'm not 100% clear what measures really define equity, what outcomes will ultimately define what equity has been achieved. So I think it would be helpful for other things as well, such as that. And I guess along with equity, and this is kind of a specific thing for equity, I'd like to hear what happens once equity has been achieved. When you think about students coming out of this school and then they go on to other things, if this school has achieved equity, does that mean when they then apply for colleges that colleges are going to stop adjusting things like SAT scores to achieve some kind of equity? Because ultimately, if they're then either gaining or losing, relative SAT points, even though this school has done relatively well with achieving equity of outcomes, that then somehow seems unfair. So I'd like to understand from a bigger perspective what's happening, and I know we attend various organizations, this Equitable Education Forum that Mr. Rizzo attends. I know we send other people to training. I'd like to understand the bigger vision of what happens when organizations start doing well with equity and how those kind of cross-organizational situations where people are leaving
you.
one organization
We've
to go
hit
to
3
another.
minutes.
How's that going to be handled? Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other members of the community who would like to speak, then I make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Is there a motion? A second?
Second.
Meeting adjourned.